Hello, everybody. We're back again after some technical difficulty, and I want to apologize for that. I'm not sure whose fault it was, but I'll be happy to take complete blame. At any rate, our other host, who's normally with us, Diane Hoffman, is now on the Awesome Osprey chat. So please join us there. She's going to try to foment some trouble over there and start asking some questions and start needling all of you to join into the conversation. So the conversation today, of course, is about the book that we have been reading, which is Soaring with Fidel by David Gessner. And the last 3 weeks, we have taken different sections of the book. So this week, we're going to cover it in its entirety, its overall impact on us. And as usual, I'd like to start with Judy and have her kind of walk through uh, the impact, the literary impact, what you found in it, the literary devices that the author used, and how it kind of compares to other travel logs and nature books. Thank you, Judy. We,
Judy's
we
being,
have to,
there you go.
there we go.
I muted myself because I thought perhaps feedback was part of the issue. So um, here I am.
I
Okay.
think
Well, uh, I think that this book is good of kind. I mean, obviously, our author knows how to write, and he's got a wonderful gift for description. Um, he's single-minded in his pursuit of the journey that he undertakes is obviously a parallel journey to the ones that the Osprey are taking, and then we're given clues to other ways that there may be connection between his adventure in flying south and the birds. And ultimately, that's with Fidel. And coming back, um, they both come back kind of to the same area. Um, and so it does come complete circle. I think there were, um, as a travel book, there's only one element. I had no problem with his science, with his bird information. I found it very interesting, and I'm not a birdie, so um, it was accessible. I could glean what I could take from it. I wasn't as impressed with all of the um, hoity-toity, fancy, top of the line ornithologists, bird people. Anyway, I didn't know enough about it to be impressed, but he didn't force us to linger too long. And the things that these people had to say were, in effect, helping him establish his own credibility to take us on this journey. He's establishing that his interest and passion lead before he admits he's not a scientist, but he doesn't go around pretending to be one either. His interest in these birds seems almost mysterious to himself at times. He questions his own decision, I guess, in certain ways. He's like in wonderment that he just makes this spontaneous decision, just like one of the birds lifting up as though it's going to go fishing, and then it gets a look in its eye and it just starts flying. And that's kind of what he does. There were talks before with Diane and I, comparing feminist notes on some of his decisions as a family man, and how that it's so guy. Uh, yeah, the world is made up of guys too, so that's all right. One issue I did have with his travel log is one that I run into occasionally as an instructor in nonfiction, And that has to do with his first impression of Cuba. His language changes there, and he's comparing it to Berlin after the wall fell. He seems a little disgruntled that his cab driver speaks only Spanish. It's like, dude, you're in Cuba. Um, and there are some of the words that he uses show judgment of the exhaust belched from the buses, the stink of the alleys, the looking like housing projects. Even when it comes to his friend Freddie and the house that they've been so proud to, Freddie has been able to provide for his growing family. And, his comment there is it was by American standards nothing to be proud of. The buses retched clouds. That's that's worse than belching. Anyway, so what he's doing is casting a bit of judgment in his language choice. He is measuring this foreign country through the eyes of an American. His lens is pure American, and he is, in sense, in his privilege, making a judgment upon that. He doesn't always do this. There are times when he seems more generous. The hospitality, for instance, the friendliness that he needs. He's sharing the cab up to the rock with whoever is standing alongside the road, and he seems kind of good-natured about that. He's a little bewildered by it, but good-natured all the way. So I guess one of the questions I would ask is, that was a down part for me, reading about his, just the kind of harsh light that there are ways of describing developing nations and places where food security is at issue and where resources are few, and being able to describe it authentically and accurately, but without using the kind of verbs and adjectives that seem to scorn it or roll one's eyes at it. Anyway, did you have anything to add to that? Any direction you would like me to go, Suzanne?
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting topic. And I think I would like to have you expound a little bit on that, on how travel writing, how travelers go to foreign cultures and are able to drop their own cultural expectations and
Right.
experience it, without carrying that judgment forth. I mean, yes, you want the detailed descriptions. You want to know that indeed the air was full of exhaust. Yes, because that is descriptive of the place. But I think that's a really important part of travel logs. And could you talk a
Well,
little bit about
sure.
that?
When I'm looking down, I'm looking at my book. I don't
Yeah.
have it shared up on the screen here.
Yeah.
But one of the car, you get into this cab, and he talks about how he scoffed his way through Spanish class, and he's stuck having to try to figure out how to communicate with this fellow. But the car, the make of which I couldn't recognize, wasn't much more than a bulked up go-kart, and Marcos certainly drove it that way. So you look at this choice, and this is a writer. This is a man who makes a professional choice in order to say that the car was pieced together from, various, you could you can tell that the embargo has been there and what the embargo has done. He doesn't spend much time talking about the embargo and its effect on the country and their ability. They've got a lot of Soviet parts for things, and he points that out. I'm trying to find. Okay. I have these things identified by location number. And anyway, when
you're bringing up a point here, Judy, that I think is a really pertinent point given what's happening in our country right now, and in that our choice of words tells people where we think we are relative to the subject that we are talking.
Right. It seems obvious to outsiders when they read this that this is a fellow, regardless, we don't know him. I mean, but he's giving evidence that he believes himself to be better than this. Yeah. That he deserves better than this. That this is a shock to his system. The airplane that he gets on, which you might add doesn't crash with him, didn't seem to gain enough speed, murmuring mild panic when what looked like smoke began pouring into the cabin, but it's condensation from the ancient air conditioning system, despite the broken down checkered seats like those in a low-rent nursing home. I had an enjoyable trip. Well, what are we taking away from that sentence? It isn't, low-rent nursing home, I had an enjoyable trip. Come on. Yeah, I mean, it's just he's undercutting everything with this kind of snide judgment on, and he walks a fine line. He may consider it humor, and some people.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
bringing this up, I really was, as citizen scientist, as a researcher, this book has just opened up, so many pathways to go on a journey. And when I'm reading sentences like that, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I think I'm just going to stop at Florida. And then he's talks about Venezuela, and I definitely don't want to go there now. So
yeah. Well, and anyway, it's one of the problems with it as a travel book. I think he gets his birds fact right. I think he could have modified his approach to the foreign culture and been more distanced from it, more objective, less judgmental. And I think one of the risks we run is alienating people from that kind of, we used to call it the ugly American. And you imagine the American tourist who is not going to put up with secondhand service or, anyway. That's a stereotype, but it's based on a certain amount of fact. We are a very privileged nation. An airline like that would not operate for long unless it was running between Billings and Miles City, Montana. I've been there. We used to call it Big Scare Airline instead of Big Sky. Anyway, small regional airplanes, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm really interested in this, Judy, because I've done a lot of traveling, and I have been with a lot of people who are from different cultures, and I can really see that it's what you choose to notice and how you choose to describe what you notice. And I'm thinking now of my former ranch manager who was from Romania, and he grew up in the communist Romania, and this man could fix anything with nothing.
Yeah.
And just like the Cubans can fix any car with nothing. I mean, there is an ingenuity of having to deal with so much less, being able to continue to keep that car running is something to compliment, not denigrate. It can be. You know what I'm saying? It can be looked at from either one of those perspectives. And I think it's, having these kinds of discussions is very good for me personally, because I think it is, all too easy to look at things from our privileged perspective as opposed to from the perspective of the person who's doing the ingenuity and who's built this house. He has a house. Freddie had a home. He had the home and he built it himself. He's quite proud of it.
Yeah.
So I think these kinds of discussions, even with a book that is not really about that, but it seeps in. It seeps into the texture of the book.
Well, and the sort of exoticness of it is also kind of emphasized in a way that in his, he's talking about Santiago and how it's a revelation after the drabness of Havana. And I had entered a different world. We wove around other exhaust spewing cars. He's really fixated on the exhaust that looked held together with rubber bands, and then around carts pulled by donkeys and men on bicycles and antique American cars from the 50s and Russian motorcycles with sidecars, and then around a woman who seemed to be herding a single black pig. And so there's just kind of this reveling in the exotic nature of this place. It's like, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Well, most of us have watched enough PBS and travel documentaries and whatever that we're not especially shocked by that. My son described driving in Seoul, Korea for 2 years when he was there with the Army, and he said it's just, sometimes you just pull into a rest stop and sit there and breathe. It's not like it is here, right. But that's okay too. Yeah. You're not here, you're there. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think it does not ruin the book, but it was noticeable to me that there were times that I wished his take was less Americanized, I guess, in its focus, or less seen through the filter of sort of the American privilege. It's like, oh my gosh, and pit toilets, He
was certainly able to convey the birds through a non-scientific perspective. I mean, he clearly brought both of those perspectives easily to the reader, the scientific and yes. The non-scientific. And that, I thought he succeeded in that at that level. So, Michael, what would you have to say? I know you've created a presentation about the birds. Let's focus for a minute on the birds. And you want to give us your presentation, Michael?
Yes, I would be happy to share my presentation, and I'm glad that we're doing more of the ending sharing of ideas about this book. And I'm just so thankful for reading this book because, again, as a student, as a researcher, as a citizen scientist, or a bird watcher, David will bring us on this journey and introduces all of these places that we need to go. And for that, I am very appreciative.
Yeah.
It looks like I'm disabled to share my screen.
I think you have to do that, James, since I made you the
host.
The host. Can you do that, James?
Yeah, I don't have any host privileges on my dashboard here, unfortunately.
So how do I do this? I really messed up this time. How do I do
that's okay. It should be somewhere on the panel, right?
You should have a share screen icon on yours.
Michael. I do have a share screen. That would allow me to share my screen, but not...
Well, why doesn't Michael have one?
Well, I do have a share screen icon, and when I select it, it says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Well, shame on you.
I don't know.
I know, and I really wanted to share my information because I just picked like these awesome highlights and like some great information from scientific articles and video, the things that we didn't cover. So, and it really just left a lasting impression on, you know, what I've learned from this book. Let me keep pressing that button.
Yeah. Oh boy, I don't know. I don't see anything that I can do to alter it. I don't.
In the Zoom meeting, is you know the bottom panel where it shows share screen? I think
Yeah.
there might be somewhere on there that can do that.
Screen now.
Okay, let me share my screen. Let's see how this will. No, it says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Try it again.
Okay, now there we go. All right, we will make it through these technical difficulties. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. Okay, so hopefully you see my PowerPoint. I'm gonna make that in the present mode. How is that? Can everyone see that?
Yes. Thank you. Very good. Thank you, James, for helping out here.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. So one of the main things that he talked about in the book was about electrocution and collision. And I wanted to know, you know, more information about this, especially with the numbers, with the metrics. Well, how many birds, you know, are we losing with electrocution and collision? Would any of you like to take a guess? Do you think you may know some ballpark range of what that number is for birds in general?
I don't know, but I bet it's significant.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I didn't know. And, you know, without reading this book or actually reading other books. In fact, this, the latest journal from the Journal of Raptor Research, they dedicated a whole issue to this exact subject. And I delved into the scientific literature. And here's one from Scott Loss and the other authors about refining the estimates of the mortality rates. And according to this study, each year, 8 to 57 million birds die by collision. And on top of that, about 1 to 12 million die by electrocution. So that's about 70 million each year. That's very significant. That's substantial. And I can see why that there is just so much money being invested into type of these excluders on developing, you know, proper power lines and transmission poles. And it's apparently, you know, big business.
What is the spread between 8 and 57 million seems to be?
Yeah, exactly. It's a wide range, and that depends on the models that they use. But yeah,
8 million to 57 million is not even in the same ballpark.
Right. That's an extra zero at the end. And the same with the 1 million to almost 12 million. So yeah. I think what they're trying to emphasize is like it ranges from each year to each year. Some years, you know, can be in the lower millions, where sometimes in other years it can be in the high millions.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. But there is a lot of money, there's a lot of investment, and these companies here, I have their logos in the bottom, but they invest a lot into developing, you know, these innovative research protocols. They invest in raptor biologists, bird biologists, and, you know, the types of technologies that can prevent and mitigate all these bird mortalities. And it's written in their avian protection plans, also known as APPs. And these are documents that electrical utilities use to guide modifications of their electric systems and to operations to reduce avian electrocutions and collisions. So yeah, in North America, the most influential documents in APP development are Avian Power Line Interaction Committees, APLIC, and Best Practices Manuals, BPMs. And James Dwyer, I met him at the Raptor Research Conference. I'm taking a quote from him. The single most important document for mitigating raptor electrocutions in North America is now 14 years old and urgently needs to be updated.
Michael,
Yes.
does this include electrical generation wind turbines?
That needs to be updated as to, and hopefully the Raptor Research Foundation will have a separate issue revolving around this. But then again, that's such an innovative approach. And we need a lot more research with wind turbines, but they are known to be placed in, you know how oceans have these tides and these currents. Well, it's the same thing with the atmosphere and the air. You know, sometimes the birds will use these currents, these passages, and right in the middle of that are these wind turbines. And of course, you know, some of the birds travel at night where they can't see the turbines and consequently get killed.
Yeah, I mean, he pointed that out very well, that there are these funnels, these airplane funnels. So it makes sense that the wind turbines would be placed there as well, and would be almost a setup for raptors to be.
Yeah, it's like it's a trap. It's a death trap, basically.
Yeah.
And there's so much technology that we should develop better, you know, technology instead of wind turbines. You know, I think there's like some of these weird, long, cylindrical things that shake instead of spinning blades. So that might be a better, a more viable option. But again, the science, the technology is new. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to see.
Very interesting.
Okay, next, another cool subject that I really wanted to share was about sea thermals. And I found this scientific literature from Olivier Dureyes and other authors on the migrating ospreys using sea thermal uplift. And I just wanted to read the first and last sentence of this abstract before going into the main points of the paper. So most large raptors on migration avoid crossing the sea because of the lack of atmospheric convection over temperate seas. The osprey is an exception among ospreys, since it can fly over several hundred kilometers of open water. And in the last sentence it states, these observations help explain the transoceanic cosmopolitan distribution of osprey and question the widely held assumption that water bodies represent strict barriers for large raptors. Another reason to love ospreys is because that they do fly over large water bodies. And again, with the sea thermals, here's some interesting points. The climb rate over the ocean is almost 2 times, 1.6 times slower on large body of waters than it is on land. And raptors, ospreys, will require more flapping while in the sea thermals. And this is due to the weaker convection cells.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And also in this paper, they had this highly sophisticated, high-tech figure that I'm going to share. Here it is. So don't get lost with all of these graphs on the right side, but the figures on the right just illustrate the advancements in the technology and the transmitters. These transmitters can now detect birds flapping if they're strapped onto them, so by magnetic pulses. So I found that really mind-blowing. But let's focus here on the central figure. If you can see my mouse right here. So let's say you have an osprey flying over the water. There's a lot of flapping that's happening here, as these vertical lines represent. And once there is contact with the thermal, the osprey can soar high into the thermal and begin its circular climbing pattern. And that's further accentuated by this figure here to the bottom left. And these blue dots...
Each one of those dots, Michaels, is a flap of its wings.
You got it. Each one of these dots and these yellow vertical lines is a flap. Okay. So according to this paper, this is more numerous over ocean than it is on land.
Right.
And then once the apex is reached here, that you have this phase of just gliding, the gliding phase in which they can rest. Doesn't require that much energy. and they can just glide over to land. So I found this figure really, really nice. Hopefully one day I can produce something like that.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So another figure that I wanted to share, we'll just focus on the center one. And this line here is laden with red dots. And these red dots indicate the flaps. And this red area is the ocean, or a large body of water. This is the land. So again, you can see here just how many flaps are over water. You know, there's rarely any soaring, very minimal. But once the Osprey hits land, as indicated here, it rests, but it immediately is able to go into energy conservation mode by soaring, and then soaring into gliding. You can also see here how the Ospreys will use like ridges to generate further uplift, and again, just save and conserve more energy. So I found that just so fascinating when David mentioned something about sea thermals, something I had to look into and to share. But again, bringing back the focus to Freddie, right, who inspired David to do this research, I think, you know, David should have waited just a few more years, because I know he used that 686 or so numbers to get inspired to share his story. Well, in this article, he and the fellow authors not only went to La Gran Piedra to do counts, but he also went to Siboney. And here they spot 7,000 ospreys.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, 7,000. So yeah, thinking about how he, you know, what he wrote about Cuba, you know, from that, you know, American perspective. Well, now, you know, okay, yeah, that isn't inhibiting me from going there, but I want to see this, the 7,000 ospreys. That's just mind blowing. And at the apex, at the max visiting, it was during October, in which they were counting about 20 ospreys per hour. And that's impressive.
Wow.
So here's a map of southeastern Cuba on the top. And then we're going to focus on the southeastern point here, where you have La Gran Piedra and also Siboney, which is further south and also on the coast. And I wanted to share a few photos of how Siboney looks. And it's just, you know, absolute tropical heaven. I mean, yeah, I want to visit that for sure. You got clear waters, shallow water. Again, I can see why ospreys use this place as a resident habitat and also as a migratory resting point. But, you know, with beauty, you have to deal with this. And in the book, David mentions another hurricane, and this is Hurricane Charlie, which was a Category 4, you know, going right through Cuba and also Florida. And you can see here just the path of destruction that this hurricane did. I wanted to share this video on, hopefully the volume is not too loud. I'm just going to highlight a couple of points on this video and just shows the destruction, the power of the wind. Here we go on one.
Right now, as we speak, I am in the eye wall.
At the same time, I can just hear that. That's just really intense. And, you know, I always worry about, you know, life, ospreys, birds, humans, property. That's just really intense.
So it's little.
Go ahead.
It's little wonder that the birds can sense these air pressure differences, because it really means a lot to them, both in
life
terms
or death.
Yeah,
Life or death, and they've evolved. They have mechanisms within their physiology that can detect these slight changes in pressure. Again, when the pressure is falling or when it's getting low, they skedaddle, they get out of there, you know, and sometimes the fronts of these hurricanes will push them into safety. Whereas, earlier in the presentation, raptors and birds haven't developed on the evolutionary side about, with power lines and electrocution.
Right.
So they haven't developed the strategies yet. So I'm glad that there's a lot of work, a lot of humans who are helping in that subject.
Yeah.
But in 2004, within 6 weeks, there were 4 major hurricanes that passed through Florida and the Caribbean. And we heard David talk about Hurricane Ivan on the upper right. That was a Category 5. We had Charlie, was Category 4. And then we had Francis and Jean. And then if you look at the path, they just rip right through Cuba, and they direct hit on Florida. So that's just really scary and impressive. But then I found this article about a local bird watcher. His name is Craig, and he reported in magazines on of course people worry about birds and we worry about ospreys, but according to him, what he saw was that after the storm, he saw more ospreys than usual, right? Which is really interesting. And sometimes he counted 20 or more on trees. And I think what he was trying to emphasize was that the mortality rate of birds or ospreys was not that high, but more so it was about habitat destruction. So with the hurricanes and the destruction of their habitat, ospreys just couldn't find, places to perch or to potentially breed a nest on. So we're still in Florida, and we are at Sanibel Island. And if you look at the upper left, here is the location on Google Maps. And if you look at the bottom left, that's just paradise. Not only for us, but also apparently for ospreys too. They have a lot of population numbers here where the fishing is good, and they can just take, lovely strolls on the beach. But Sanibel Island is also home to the International Osprey Foundation, and they are dedicated to the preservation of the osprey. I highly recommend that you visit this site. They provide research grants. They have lots of news about the ospreys in Florida, and also they can link you with a lot of other foundations and organizations specifically focusing on osprey work. And I'll definitely do more research on them. And as a student, I think they provide grants. So I will definitely connect with them. Again, thank you, David. And finally, I wanted to share Lake Istapoga. And earlier in the Awesome Osprey project, we had a very special guest. We had Mark Smith, who is a world-renowned photographer, public figure. And he lives in Florida, and he's done his research and photography near this area and featured Lake Istapoga. And he said one of the most fascinating things about this lake is that if you look on the photo to the left, there is these cypress trees that are jutting out of the water and are all over the lake, and they provide the most perfect nest sites for the ospreys. And according to the last survey, there was about maybe 700 nesting pairs in this focal area. And the colony's been there for such a long time that when bigger birds of prey, such as bald eagles, come into this area, the osprey colony, they will form a fleet and they will chase these bald eagles away so that they can, protect their young and live in peace. And again, lots of good fishing in this area. So definitely a place that I want to visit.
Well, me too. And one of the things that I have found most interesting in this book is before I read the book, I just did not understand that ospreys would colonize. Here in Montana, they're very territorial. You've watched our nest all summer, and any intruding osprey is an alarm call. They want them out of there, and it's interesting to me how they have such different social behavior depending upon where they are.
Yeah, exactly. You hit it right on target. And doing field research here in California, again, they're very territorial, not much colonizing behavior. But it looks different on the East Coast and the Caribbean. It seems that they're more residential and they are social.
Yeah, yeah. That was
again, which demands more study.
Yeah. Well, that was fabulous, Michael. Really fabulous. You really added a lot to our understanding, and I do, I really enjoyed this book because it did bring up so many new aspects of ospreys that I had not considered quite.
Absolutely, it forced you out of the nest and you take a journey with them south.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to be interested to see if your data at the end of this season with the 12 nests is going to reveal some of those differences, because you did have some ospreys inland and some on the coast and some on the east coast and some on the west. And now I'm thinking that ospreys are far more complex than I had initially thought.
Yeah, I agree. Far more complex, especially with, the different subspecies, and we just don't have that much information and data to make significant or substantial, conclusions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask Diane on the chat if she has any questions or has been talking to people about the book, and if anybody wants to chime in. Now, the one thing I had to mention is I didn't think that David ever gave a good explanation of why he renamed the bird Fidel. He just did, and then he dropped it. I kept waiting for an explanation.
Bluebeard. Bluebeard was the original name, and then he changed it to Fidel. And I think he just wanted to imply or insinuate that, okay, I'm going to go against the BBC. They're following this bird, Bluebeard. I'm following Fidel because it's my journey to Cuba. He just wanted to claim Bluebeard as his own Fidel. So, but yeah, he didn't bring that back at the end, so I found that pretty interesting.
Well, there's Diane.
Hi, Diane.
His war with the BBC
I'm following Fidel.
was a significant, conflict, I guess, in the book.
I did like the way he went back to Nantucket to see Fidel.
I think we're having some echo.
War with the BBC was a significant, conflict.
Well, Judy, you're right, because I did like the way he went back to Nantucket to see Fidel.
Diane?
Okay, all I wanted to say.
I think something's happening, Diane. I think you have to turn off your Google.
Judy, you're right, because I did like the way he went
Diane?
Yes? Okay, all I wanted to say.
You have the website up in a different tab, Diane.
I think something's happening, Diane. I think you have to turn off your Google.
I think I have to get out of Zoom.
Diane?
Yes?
Do you want to try again, Diane? Do you want to speak and see if you're off of your? It sounded to me like you had your speaker on the website, so that's how you got the echo. That's certainly what I did, and it's easy.
I probably did. That's exactly what I did. Can you hear me now?
Yes, and there's no.
Yes, that's good.
Go ahead. I think
what I was going to suggest, Suzanne, is that when I saw all the osprey down in Florida, which is still my osprey heaven practically, they were not in mating season. And therefore their social interactions and their social behaviors were way different than they were when they were protecting nests and protecting little ones. And that's why I think there's a big difference between what you see in Montana and what you see in the leisurely world of the not raising chicks.
I think that's exactly right, and it brings up the question of those birds who don't migrate, but who stay in the same place and nest
Indeed.
in the same place. I was wondering about that. We only get them during the nesting season up here.
Well, we noticed this in the great blue heron, because great blue herons had always been thought to live in rookeries, because that's only we're fine to study them, where we're in rookeries. So when we started watching it at Cornell on a single nest, it turns out a lot of GBH are single. They don't live in a rookery, but nobody ever studied them because they were just one nest. I think we're the opposite with osprey. We look at one nest, but we don't know how social they are otherwise, because they haven't been. We don't know if there are. I don't know if there are osprey rookery, which means that I haven't done enough literature searches. Michael, that's up to you to find out.
Oh yeah, I would love to go out and do more research and provide substance to that. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Well, I wonder if there are rookeries, and I would look for them in Florida. Is that a nice thing to do, Michael?
That would be great. I would love to go and study these colonies.
I would too. Actually, I'd even go to Venezuela. And by the way, Judy, I love your background there.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah.
Well, that was my main question, but there were a lot of observations going on behind the scenes that Suzanne can tell you. But also, Michael, your name came up on Zoom as Michael Academia.
Correct.
There were people who wondered, is that your last name? And I said,
oh yeah, I get that. I get that all the time, and I have to live up to it, especially to the professors. They expect that I be the paragon, the apex. I can't. Yeah, I have to get A's.
Well, they really loved your snippets, Michael. They were really excited. So
thank you.
And they also wanted me to say good luck to you at William and Mary.
Thank
and
you.
I hope you continue Osprey research.
I will. Absolutely.
Well, you have a start on it.
Yeah, and that brings me to telling people what's next for Awesome Osprey. And I am sad to say this is going to be our last broadcast and probably our last newsletter, weekly newsletter. Right before the broadcast, Michael and I had a bit of a time to chat. And what we would like to do is come back and have a broadcast and a newsletter that wraps up that last little phase. We'll get to check in with Michael as he gets into William and Mary and as he gets engaged in his classes. So we'll be able to touch base with him. And we'll kind of close out the fledging of all of the birds that are still there. But things really slow down now for all of the nests now that the birds are about to depart. And Michael's going to be on the road to William and Mary. So first of all,
when do you go to college?
I fly out on August 12th.
Sorry. What?
But August 12th. But next week,
you're going to hit the Osprey migration.
I know, and I really want to go.
You're going to be on the Chesapeake when they're coming down.
Exactly.
Oh, you're going to be right on the edge of the Atlantic Flyway. Yay!
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I'll be busy.
I was actually thinking of going up to Hawk Mountain for a moment. Only a moment.
Well, yeah, I move on the 12th, but next week I start with online training because I'm a graduate teaching assistant.
Yep.
So everything's starting earlier this year because of all of the fluidity with the situation. So there's a lot of change happening and it's hard to keep up, but I have to be ready.
Are they actually going to classes?
Yeah, we are going to go to classes. It's going to be a hybrid system, but there's just a lot of safety protocols and procedures and a lot of changing that's happening. And there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of meetings, so I'm just really busy.
Well, you're in a good place because William and Mary is small enough to be nimble.
Very.
And that's good to see. I mean, it's a lot harder for a Harvard or a Princeton to pivot than a William and Mary. And you must be feeling the same way, Judith.
Oh, I don't feel very nimble at all. But yeah, no. What Michael says is academia all over, United States and beyond. So our intention is to have at least some face-to-face teaching time, but in reality, we have no idea. Everything depends upon what happens next, and we have no control over that. So
no. Well, whatever happens, we can all get together virtually, and we will try to do that in mid-September and catch up on where everybody is in the world dealing with COVID. And until then, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our citizen scientists for participating, and I want to say, Michael, you've just done an outstanding job of curating and keeping everybody engaged and interesting. And Judy, every time I read a book with you, I learn so much, and I read it differently. And I just treasure your perspective because it really deepens my appreciation of the book. So I really want to thank you for that.
you're very welcome.
Yeah, and Diane, thank you. Your presentation were just lovely, and you always bring a huge spirit and a desire to get people engaged, and I really appreciate that. I think everybody does. They're all saying thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you jumped back
I'm
on.
off chat now, so I can't see what's being said about me.
I know. I've got 2 screens. I get to do this. So. Thank you all, and may you all have a wonderful August. And as they say, we'll see you in September. Thank you.
We'll be watching you from the East Coast and welcoming you, Michael, when you come.
Oh, thank you, Diane. I'm
And
so
Judy,
excited.
when we're out of COVID, come to our garden. You'd love it.
I will. I'll bring jam.
Oh, yes, the jam. I'll go.
Oh, in that case, I'll send you airfare.
Oh, yeah. Well, send me your mailing address, and I can probably roll it up in little sleeves of bubble wrap and ship it on down.
I'll do that, Judy. Your jam is unequaled.
Oh, wow.
No. I about 2 years when I was at Dunrovin, and we had a dinner there to plot the book club.
Yeah.
Judy gave me a jar of peach.
Ooh.
Oh my God! It's the only jam I've ever had in my life that I would share with no one. No one. It's the most delicious jam I have ever had.
I'm getting hungry.
Sensational.
So I just want to thank everybody for their patience with our technical difficulties this time, and I'll take ownership of that. I started this Zoom without James holding my hand. He's the one who normally starts this, and I want to give a big shout out to James, who makes all of this possible for all of us.
James.
Hey, James.
Thank you very much, James. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. We very much appreciate all of you, and we'll be seeing you in September.
Yes.
I love you keeping us on track, Suzanne. Bye-bye.